The Pittsburgh Steelers suffered another terrible loss, this one 35-13 at the hands of the Philadelphia Eagles. The Steelers are 2-6 heading into the bye week. What's the biggest concern on top of a long list of other concerns? We'll talk about that on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday updates, as well as our bonus content when we have time to release it. Thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Steelers fans, that was rough. And I feel like I've said that a lot this season. It sucks to watch that. And in a lot of ways, there were times in this game where you had some hope, and I think that's the even crusher about it, is that you couldn't just turn this one off after the first quarter. Well, actually, you kind of could, but at the same time, they were legitimately in the game. If you're just a football watcher who understands that the pace of the game, they get a touchdown in the first quarter, they get a field goal in the second quarter, the defense forces a couple punts, and then you're thinking, okay, and then the defense gives up another long touchdown pass, and the offense has a field goal drive, but then has two turnovers in the fourth quarter. And you're just like, it's just like frustration on top of frustration. And I feel you, Steelers fans. It's very frustrating watching the team because a lot of things are going wrong. But maybe the most important thing that is going wrong is the amount of weight that the Steelers are placing on Kenny Pickett's shoulders right now. And it's not just a game plan thing. It's an execution thing. It's a discipline thing, and it's something that both Najee Harris and Kenny Pickett talked about after the game. Kenny Pickett talked about, everyone kind of needing to be accountable, look each other in the eyes, and move forward. And you could sense his real frustration when he was talking about it after the game because, now the Steelers are 2-6. I believe this is the worst record that Kenny Pickett's ever been a part of. It's not the worst record Mike Tomlin's ever been a part of, because remember 2013, he did go 2-6, and they were able to bounce back for a 6-2 finish to that season. The question is, can they do that this year? Because that year, they were able to find some chemistry because Le'Veon Bell got healthy, and they were able to ride that moving forward. This year, Najee Harris, he doesn't have Marquise Pouncey in there, or David Castro, whoever was on that offensive line back then. Marcus Gilbert played a big role then, blocking for them moving forward. And I think, again, it goes back to how much weight can you put on Kenny Pickett right now? Bill Cowher said this after the game on the CBS postgame, talking about, you can't have him throwing this much in games. You can't have him carrying the team this much because you're going to get him killed. And I think that when you look at the broad number, the general numbers of this game, 25 of 38, that's not terribly overloading a quarterback. But in general, you do want to limit how many times you have to do that in games, and especially against an opponent like the Eagles, who preys on mistakes, who's the best turnover creating team in the NFL right now, and the best. And I think that what the Steelers have done right now is they haven't had good enough of an offensive line play. They gave up 6 sacks. Granted, a few of those were on Kenny because he didn't get the ball out in time, and there were open options. But at the same time, and I want to say this too, I'm not alleviating Kenny Pickett of any responsibility that he had in this game, because he absolutely had opportunities. There were open guys, there were well-schemed plays that he did not execute. But at the same time, you have to have other guys on your team that can lift him up when he makes those mistakes, whether it's a receiver who makes a ridiculous play, a running back who makes a ridiculous run, an offensive line who gives everyone kind of a chance to make a play, and no one's making those plays. And Najee Harris, you look at his play. There's times I'm the person that's been saying, like, hey, a lot of the times when he runs smack dab into a defensive line, a lot of that's just because the defense is selling out to get him. But you can even see Najee Harris is hesitating because he's frustrated. And on the third down pass, when Kenny Pickett hit him in space, Najee Harris danced. And some people have said, oh, he dances too much. There's times when dancing is necessary because there's three defensive linemen in your face and you got no other space to go to, and you got to figure out something else. And you can't run smack dab into that, as Jaylen Warren found out when he started to get carries when the defense was looking for it. But there are also times when we're charging forward does work, and it would have worked on the next play. Najee Harris made up for in the next one by converting on 4th down. But ultimately in this game, you're in a situation where you need someone else to help, because your offensive line and your offense in general. I mean, there were 9 penalties in this game for 80 yards, and the majority of them were on offensive players, illegal formations. Kenny Pickett had to delay a game. And the offensive pass interference ones you could take on the chin a little bit. It's like, all right, George Pickens is just doing what most receivers do, but procedural penalties, illegal formations, those are the things that have to get cleaned up. Talent. People talk about talent. I think talent is an issue for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now because they're not overcoming it. But you can fight better with the talent that you have when you're being more disciplined in those mistakes. When you're not doing the things that are hamstringing you. And even on the touchdown drive, when you go back and look at what the Steelers had, they lost 9 yards in penalties on that drive. On the field goal drive in the second quarter, they lost 10 yards in penalties on that drive. And on the field goal in the second quarter, they lost, or the third quarter, field goal in the third quarter, they lost 10 more yards and penalties. And that's where, if you're asking Kenny Pickett to lift you up through all of that, that's where you're going to run into problems. And that's where the Steelers have run into problems. And we'll get to the defense in a bit. You may think, oh, Chris is talking a lot about the offense. He doesn't think the defense played poorly. Oh, no, don't worry. They did. We'll get to them in a minute. But I think with this offense, and again, it's not just Matt Canada, it's not just Mike Tomlin, it's not just Kenny Pickett himself. It's across the board, and everyone has to own this. And the good thing, I guess, is that with the bye week, they get a chance to kind of rest up a little bit, look at everything, and kind of at least come up with a plan to say, hey, let's go at it this way. But I mean, if you look at Kenny Pickett's passing chart from Next Gen Stats, I mean, if you're listening here, I apologize that I can't show it to you, but I'll describe it as best as I can as our YouTube viewers are looking at it. But there's a lot of green dots for completed passes for Kenny Pickett at or around the line of scrimmage, and there aren't a lot of attempts. There's only 2 passes on this chart that show Kenny Pickett on Sunday against the Eagles going down the middle in between the hash marks. That's a huge problem. And I said all week long, the game plan needed to be to get the ball down the middle. Actually, I don't think this is too accurate, because I do think there was a pass to Chase Claypool where he caught the ball and fought forward to move the chains. I think that was actually not that was actually a pass down the middle. So this chart may be a little inaccurate, but still, you get my point. They needed to attack the middle part of the field more, and it was clear the Steelers had a strategy to avoid Darius Slay and James Bradbury, because they avoided them a lot in this game, and that was certainly part of the scheme. I think there were plenty of plays that were drawn up that could have been taken advantage of by Kenny Pickett. But again, you need to find ways to not need him to be the key component to winning the football game there, and they just aren't able to do that on offense. Whether it's because the offensive line's getting whipped, whether it's because the run game can't keep going, whether it's because the receivers aren't making enough plays, all the reasons above are part of it. And I think it comes down to, as I said before, I've said this a million times. I don't think Matt Canada's biggest problem is calling plays. I think it's that he can't get to these guys in the meeting room, in the film room, and be like, hey, this is what you need to be looking at on this in these situations. This is how we correct your he doesn't know how to talk to these guys, and he doesn't know how to get them on the same page with his scheme. Now, granted, I will say, it's funny enough, when the Steelers were 2-6 the last time in 2013, a lot of people were saying the same thing about Todd Haley. And, well, his offense went on to be one of the, best numerical offenses or statistical offenses in recent Steelers history. But Matt Canada ain't Todd Haley. Todd Haley was a head coach with a lot of experience in the NFL, football lineage through his father, and a lot of other the ways that he was able to go in and be like, hey, you know what? I can talk to Ben Roethlisberger however I want to talk to him, and we're going to move forward with this. Or I could get in these guys' faces and say, hey, this is what we need to do this week to win. The question, I think, is that can Matt Canada do that? I don't know. Will the Steelers get rid of him at the bye week? I doubt it. If they do at this point, I think you're just putting in another guy that's going to do and say the same things with Mike Sullivan. It's not like he's really helping Kenny Pickett's mechanics right now either. So I'm not so sure that changes a whole lot, because I know some people think that that's the end all be all answer that will just fix everything magically. I don't think it will, but I think the biggest problem is that everything is stacked up too much on Kenny Pickett. When they come back out of the bye week, they have to find a way to alleviate some of the pressure off his shoulders. Some of that can also be helped by the defense not giving up 35 points. We'll talk about the defense in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, but first, we have to talk to you because this episode is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Life is full of twists and turns, and it's important to show up for yourself through it all. I've personally faced plenty of times in my life where I've tried to shoulder on a lot of burdens, but I found my answers thanks to help from good therapists. That's where BetterHelp Online Therapy comes in, because they'll assess your needs and they can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. As a person who has gotten help from therapists, sometimes it's just about organizing your thoughts when you're going through things and you're going through your day-to-day and you're trying to deal with everything all at once. Sometimes you forget the things that are about yourself when you can say, hey, if I had time to think about that and organize that thought, that would help me through my day. That's where therapy comes in for you. When you talk about BetterHelp, they're not a crisis line. They're not self-help. They're actual professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. You can log on into your account anytime and send a message to your therapist. With therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you. BetterHelp makes it easy and free to change therapists if needed. And they have a special offer for our listeners, 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Again, that's 10% off your first month of online therapy at BetterHelp, BetterHelp@/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter, and we're continuing to talk about this slaughter at the hands of the Eagles. And I'm not trying to just talk about this game, but let's take a second here to focus on what the defense was like in this game. This defense allowed the Eagles to get into the red zone one time and still allowed 35 points. The first pass to Minkah Fitzpatrick should have intercepted in the deep ball. That's just inexcusable. You got to be able to come down with it. He said as much. He said, I'm paid to go come down with those balls, and they didn't. He should have high-pointed it. He misplayed the ball in the air. Bad mistake. But here's the one thing I'll say about that. A lot of people are saying, oh, he's terrible. It's like, okay. His track record is he makes that play 9 times out of 10. That was just the one time he didn't do it. It's unfortunate, but that's not like a schematic, a habit that's a problem with the Steelers. That's just a man, really need one of your best players to come up with a huge moment there. If he intercepts that pass, it maybe sets the tone for the game to go in a completely different direction. But the rest of the game, my goodness. I mean, you have Jalen Hurts just doing whatever he wants with the deep ball to A.J. Brown in this game. A.J. Brown, 6 catches, 156 yards, 3 touchdowns, and Ahkello Witherspoon getting absolutely torched for pretty much all of it. 2 of the touchdowns directly on him, just one-on-one down the sidelines, couldn't even get his head around on time for the plays. Just abysmal performance on his part. He ended up getting benched for James Pierre, and then the numbers to A.J. Brown slowed up at that point. They didn't stop, but they slowed up. I think that's a terrible sign for him. And I know that the Steelers were hurting because Levi Wallace wasn't in, but man, if you're the Steelers, you're feeling really rough about that cornerback situation right now, because you were hoping that as a collective, they could kind of make up for the fact that they didn't have a star corner. They didn't. And then again, you gave up 3 deep balls there. You had a miscommunication between Terrell Evans and Cam Sutton that allowed the Pascal touchdown. Just all around, just terrible on their parts. And it's crazy because, I thought Larry Ogunjobi not being there would have been the crushing point. I thought Miles Sanders, if the Eagles were going to win this game, I thought Miles Sanders was going to go off on the Steelers. He had 9 carries for 78 yards and a touchdown, and really a lot of that just came at the end when the Steelers were just tired. So I thought they actually held up. Like Cam Hayward, even Malik Reed had a good game this week. That's crazy to think about. You had Malik Reed getting a good game, and you still didn't show up. I thought Cam Sutton hung in there, but it draws into question now, like, was the entire thoughts of having this defense play this way, is it able to hold up against these top tier offenses? Because I will say, I mean, you look at how the Steelers have played a lot this season. It's not like the Steelers defense has put them out of a bunch of games right now. The two that you could say now are the Bills and the Eagles, but we can also legitimately say that the Bills and the Eagles are two of the best teams in the NFL right now. But the defense basically won you the Bengals game. They basically won you the Buccaneers game. They kept you alive against the Patriots. They kept you alive against the Browns. They kept you alive against the Jets, though they did fold late against the Jets. I will say that the defense flirted on that one. And the defense definitely kept you alive against the Dolphins. And some of those, especially the Dolphins, an offense that I think that everyone's looking at now and being like, hey, that team's really talented. I think that, the defense, they have their structure there that when people are healthy and that they're playing at the level that they're expected to, it can happen. But right now, I think that Steelers, some of the adjustments, Mike Tomlin came out of the halftime saying, the adjustments aren't the problem. And I actually agree. The passes to the AJ Brown scored on, they have defense, they have their secondary in position. Ahkello Witherspoon has to be able to get his head around it, at least attack the ball. He didn't on either one of those. Minkah Fitzpatrick has to come down. When you bracket a receiver like that, Terrell Edmonds was underneath him, Minkah Fitzpatrick was over top him, and you get a jump ball situation, you're the superstar safety. You have to come up with that play, at least break it up. The Steelers didn't do that. And there were, key plays in other possessions. While the Steelers, they were, this stat looks it ends up kind of being a little bit better because they were 4-4 on fourth downs, but the Steelers were 1 of 12 on third downs. The Eagles 7 of 12. And you look at that and you're saying, like, man, the defense, at least they got some stops, but in general, when the Eagles got into trouble and it was short distance, Jalen Hurts, a lot of the plays the Eagles were running were the same kind of things the Steelers have been trying to run. The RPOs, the fakes here, the jet sweep there, my quarterback might run with the ball. Nope, he's actually going to pitch it to this guy over there. He's going to hit the guy in the flat and he's going to be open. Why is that working? Well, because their guys are clean. Their guys have been working on this. They're much further down in the process of their rebuild than the Pittsburgh Steelers are. And I think that when you look at what they're able to do there, but you're expecting your defense to come up and win a lot more of those plays. And yes, the defense got home more in this game. You had Malik Reed get a sack. You had Cam Hayward get a sack. You had Carlos Davis kind of, be put in the position to have a sack. He got up and he made a play, not to discredit him, but that was created because Cam Hayward chased Jalen Hurts out of the pocket and Carlos Davis was in position to make it work. But still, you're expecting that group to control the game a lot more than what they actually did. And that's where I think the Steelers run into a serious situation moving forward. Again, coming back to my original point, if you're trying to you're putting a lot of weight on Kenny Pickett when the defense can't at least slow these guys down for a bit. And again, this was uncharacteristic Steelers football. Just like I felt like, the Bills game, even though the Bills are very good, the big thing that you could say about the Steelers defense was that they made you work for your points. And I think that's what they did with the Dolphins game. That's what they did with every other game except this and the Bills game. But in these two games, they've given up the big plays, and those are just unacceptable moments when you're paying for the money you are for the defense. And I will say, the people who say $100 million defense can't, as long as T.J. Watt is not out there, this defense is not $100 million because he takes about $30 million of that 100. But in all seriousness, that's still that you still need those guys to step up in those moments. And to me, people are going to say, oh, well, Terrell Austin's a terrible game plan. Actually, no, the game plan, they put these guys in situations that they were reasonably expected to win. They just didn't. And so now the question is, do you need to switch up where you line up these guys? Do you need to switch up your matchups? Which I think they put James Pierre in, and he was actually able to kind of run with AJ Brown. They went after him early in the third quarter, or early in the fourth quarter, I think it was. Or was it the third quarter? I think it was the third quarter. They went after James Pierre on AJ Brown early, and it didn't work out. And then they kind of didn't go back after it as much at that point. But the defense, you got to find answers. You got to be able to trust your guys to win spots, and they didn't in this game. Now, maybe after the bye week, they get DeMonte KZ back, and they could kind of be the defense that they were hoping they always could have been, that they have been able to, because they also get him and T.J. Watt. But it won't matter much to the rest of the season if that defense isn't collectively better, able to eliminate those big plays, and able to take some of that weight off of Kenny Pickett. I want to talk more about how to take that weight off of Kenny Pickett because, again, he deserves fault for this game because he did not play well. But there's so much to this rebuilding process that the Steelers are doing right now, and we got to talk about where they are in that process heading into the bye week at 2-6. We'll do that in just a minute. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Blue Nile. Whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. Blue Nile has simple online tools that lets you choose the diamond's shape, size, and clarity, as well as the setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft her perfect engagement ring. Each ring is one of a kind. Looking for fine jewelry, but having trouble choosing? Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find the memorable gift at every budget. Make your moments sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On's listeners will get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement rings, so do use that promo code Locked On. That's code Locked On, LOCKEDON, all one word, all capital letters. Plus, every order gets insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. Shop stress-free and find your forever piece by going to BlueNile.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's take a step back from the Eagles game itself, because we could talk about everything that went bad, and I'll go more over this when I give my stars and skulls grades on Tuesdays, because it's going to be a lot of skulls. But I want to look at this team and say, like, moving forward, does this team have a legitimate path to even compete this season? Because some people, there's some people that are saying, like, oh, they're doomed, they won't have a chance, they should just tank and get the 3rd overall pick or whatever pick that they could get right now. And tanking to me is never the answer. I don't care what situation you're in. You fight as best as you can. You get your guys to believe, because if you see, like, the guys in the locker room right now, I wasn't in Philadelphia, I was in Pittsburgh because I had to do post game shows here and everything. And I got to be at Pitt in the morning, but you look at them, and there's a sense of pain, there's a sense of frustration, of futility even at times, and they're just like, man. But if you tank, you get guys selling out, you get guys being like, I don't want to be here. And there's always some guys who might not want to be here, like AB and Le'Veon Bell at times. Those guys, you see where they are in their lives, but not the guys that buy into things. Not guys like Cam Hayward, not guys like even Najee Harris, who they want to fight, they want to win, but losing consistently is frustrating. It can tear down teams, it can tear down locker rooms, and I think that's why the Steelers won't give up this season. But you have to have a plan moving forward. Now, I'm one to tell you, I think that this Steelers team, I'm not saying they're going to make the playoffs or nothing like that, but I think they can have a couple good runs in the second half of this season where they got 9 games to finish. They're 2-6 right now. As I said before, in 2013, when they were 2-6, they bounced back for a 6-2 record. I don't know if they're doing all that, but you got teams like the Saints, the Colts, the Falcons. You have 2 games with the Ravens. They haven't been dominant. You have a game again with the Bengals. You can maybe catch them on a bad day. We'll see how they play, like without Jamar Chase, on Monday Night Football. You got the Panthers, you got the Raiders, you got the Browns at your own stadium. We'll see how the Browns look by that point of the season. Those are all, if T.J. Watt's back and this defense is healthy and they're back playing at a high level, you can feed off of that. You can win games that way. You can fight against teams, especially those teams. If they still had the Bills and the Eagles lined up and like a matchup with the Chiefs, then I'd be in a situation where I'd be like, all right, yeah, there ain't nothing happening there. But I will say, when you look at this season and the hope for it moving forward, and I said this with Paul Zeiss on a post-game show with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, but I think the biggest thing that you're in these moments, you're looking for guys who are going to be the pieces that you build around. The guys who, when everything's going wrong, they're finding a way to make things go right, and they're either making it happen, or you see the legitimate effort, like, hey, that dude's grind, that's what we want moving forward. The Steelers, when they went through those times in the late 90s under Bill Cowher, they were finding guys like Joey Porter, like Hines Ward, like Alan Faneca. You were like, you know what? Those guys, those are the ones that I want to keep around here to build up this new core. And we already see that there are some guys there, and some guys are injured right now, like T.J. Watt. But you need guys like T.J. Watt. You need guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, and he's another one that I think, shares in the frustration of everything that's going on. But you need young guys who are part of it. Unfortunately, Cam Hayward, he's not going to be around much longer. And I think it sucks for Cam Hayward because he's been a Mr. Steeler for, more than half a decade now, maybe even closer to going on like 7-8 years of a guy who's kind of been like a face for the team. And that's really unfortunate to see him if these are his final years, if they're going through this process. But you can also turn things around. As I said before with Kenny Pickett, there are other quarterbacks who struggled early on in their careers, who've had really rough first seasons and then bounced back to have very successful careers. But if you're going to do that, the Steelers need to give him a foundation. Part of it, I do think, needs to be in these next 2 weeks. You have this week and next week because of the bye week. Going over every point, like Kenny, in these situations, these are the matchups we're drawing up for you. You got to find these guys. You got to stay locked in, stay locked on, get your opportunity, take your opportunities when they're there. And that's just not what he's doing. I think, Jalen Hurts is a primary example of how Kenny Pickett could make things work. Jalen Hurts, he used his legs a little bit in this game, but a lot of them was just good, well-touched, balls. Jalen Hurts doesn't have a cannon. Kenny Pickett doesn't have a cannon. But Jalen Hurts was finding the right matchups and saying, let me get the ball to my playmakers in the right spaces, and I'm going to make it work. And it took time for Jalen Hurts to get there, just like I think it's going to take time for Kenny Pickett to get there. But in the meantime, you need to find your warriors, the guys that are going to carry on, that I think Mike Tomlin and these guys are going to, stick with. Now, for all the people that are screaming, they should get rid of Matt Canada. I don't think that Matt Canada is the long-term answer, of course, at this point. I think that, I think that you do that by the end of the season. I don't think that you get much of a different offense if you get rid of him now, because you're just promoting Mike Sullivan at this point to be, the offensive coordinator. And if you go look at his years as offensive coordinator, he was terrible. I don't know that's it. I think a big thing that you look at with right now with the Steelers is that, when this season's over, you start looking around at, bigger veteran names in the offensive process and say, hey, who wants to come coach a young quarterback with, a bunch of playmakers that we're about to invest a lot into? Because best believe, the Steelers draft picks, wherever they are, whether they're in the top 10 or the top 20, wherever they are in the NFL draft process, their top picks either in my mind, they either need a stud defensive lineman, a stud cornerback, or stud offensive lineman. I don't think they need to spend at any of the playmaker positions in the early rounds. I think those need to be guys in the trenches that they're figuring things out with, and that they're going to be able to make plays with. They're going to be able to kind of set the tone for games moving forward. But the biggest thing, if the Steelers are going to do anything for the rest of the season, find a foundation that Kenny Pickett can play from. Let him build some confidence this year. To me, honestly, more important than making a playoff run or anything like that is getting Kenny Pickett to have some sense of confidence going into his year 2. Because if you can't do that, then you can't do that and you miss the playoffs, this year was very much a waste. But if you can find a way to get the guy that you think can be your next franchise quarterback to find the footing to be your franchise quarterback, and at least go into his second year saying, hey, this is the identity that we know works for us, even with a new offensive coordinator next year. Like I know if I call this play concept with, Deontay Johnson or George Pickens or Pat Fryermuth or Najee Harris or Chase Claypool, if I call this, I know I can trust these guys in these situations. And then, next year you're working on implementing new things, because then you might have a better offensive line. You might have a better commitments to certain things, certain concepts that were available to you then next year that aren't available to you this year because you just aren't good as an offensive line. But if you're Kenny Pickett, if you're the Steelers, you got to get Kenny Pickett on a better platform to make plays from, because right now it's not there. If this is how the Steelers end their season with this kind of frustration on offense, that's a very bad sign. Granted, you can always rebuild in the offseason, get new, gut the offensive staff on coaching wise and make a serious investment to fix the offensive line and do more things with your free agency money and your NFL draft. But even with that happening, you want to have him in a better place. And I think that's the biggest thing that the Steelers have to do moving forward is get Kenny Pickett in a better place to feel about himself, because the quarterback position is the key to this revival the Steelers are hoping for moving forward. The Steelers have a bye week this week, so it's going to be a little different pace. We'll still have my Tuesday grades coming out on the Tuesday episode of Locked On Steelers, so stay tuned for that. Stars and Skulls will be a thing. Don't worry. And we're going to do some extra things with the bye week. I'm thinking about doing a mailbag episode. We haven't done one of those in a long time, or you guys can call in and give us some questions that we can bring in here. We're going to have a few things dialed up for you guys. So stay tuned with us here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I know it's a rough one, Steelers fans. I know it's a rough season, but hey, this is part of the rebuilding process. If you're a Steelers fan, you haven't had to go through this too much in your life. You're pretty much you're pretty much going through what a lot of programs, a lot of teams, a lot of organizations have gone through, and the season's only half over. There's still a chance for the Steelers to find something to build with this year. We'll talk about what things they could build with tomorrow on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Again, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Thanks again for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And stay tuned for more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Like I said, we're going to have some more guests this week. We're going to have some more grades this week and get you ready for the bye week, keeping you up to date on all things Pittsburgh Steelers right here.